If the mic is on, it doesn't sound like my mic is on. Testing, testing, testing my mic out. Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Oh, it is on. Thank you. Good evening. We'll have a few quick announcements and a prayer before we get started tonight. If you would like to go ahead and open up to Exodus 32, that would be a wise place to start out. The names that I have that have been added to our list from when we last met, we have Johnny Combs has had surgery in Louisville. We have Melissa Comer, that is a friend of Roxy Sutton, with breast cancer. Shane Patterson, one of Joe Eden's friends, with cancer behind the eye. And Kelly Smith with some respiratory breathing issues, and she's seeing a specialist for those. Are there any others that I may have missed? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Did you say your brother-in-law? Son-in-law. I may have misheard you. Okay, we'll keep praying for him. All right. Next.
Robbie County used to attend here. She was in the hospital, but she's been put in the nursing home in Gainesville.
Okay. Robbie Jones is in the nursing home in Gainesboro. Any others?
Cameron, I have a good friend. His name is Al Licht. He's having major heart surgery tomorrow. He's having a big valve, I think, put in.
Okay.
His name is Al.
Okay. Any others? Well, then we can open up with a word of prayer and get into our study. Would anybody like to open us up with prayer this evening? Thanks, Steve.
God, we're just thankful to be here tonight. We are thankful for your word and just be with us as we study it. Help us to learn some things from it that will help us in our walk through the rest of this week and our daily lives. We are thankful that we can bring these prayer needs to you, these requests that you have already heard. Just be with all those that were mentioned. Just continue to be with the teachers tonight. Direct us, help us to get something from it. Help us to be more like Jesus.
Amen. All right. Well, if you are already at Exodus chapter 32, then great. You're in the right spot. What we're studying, we're in our second week of it, and keep in mind we're making kind of a quick trip through Scripture through the lens of acceptance and rejection, because I believe that those two things are central to God's people and central to God's story from beginning to end of the Bible. And so, as you remember last week, we looked at Cain and Abel, their just simultaneous acceptance and rejection of their sacrifices. And then we also considered kind of how we handle acceptance and rejection and how that can be either really good or really bad, because obviously Cain did not handle that rejection very well, and he didn't handle it the way that God wanted him to. But as we continue with the story of God's people, as you are in Exodus 32, you know that you have the Israelites. They are out of the land of Egypt. They have made their way into the wilderness, and they finally have parked at Sinai. I will make the case. I believe that these are probably three of the most important chapters in the Old Testament. To me personally, they are the most important chapters in the entirety of the Old Testament for a couple different reasons. But one, we learn so much about the pattern of the relationship between God and His people that are going to take place for the rest of time that start right here. So as you have this Sinai moment, what I want for us to do is let's begin to walk through these three chapters. Let's talk about what's happening and what takes place, who does what, how people respond, and just fill in all the gaps. Since it's three chapters straight, I'm going to need your help. And if you don't help me fill in the blanks, we'll just start reading, and maybe by the end of class we can have all three chapters read. That's a joke. So that means help me fill in the blanks of what happens. So in chapter 32, what do you see? What's taking place? Who's where and what do they do? Okay, perfect. So you have Moses up on Mount Sinai in conversation with God. Okay, so what do we notice at the very beginning of chapter 32 about Moses and his time on the mountain? What does it say? Yeah, there was a delay, and they got tired of waiting for him. So as Moses is delayed, as the people are tired of waiting on him, you have Aaron that takes matters into his own hands, and he tells them to bring me all of your gold. We're going to melt it down, and we're going to make a golden calf. Okay, once they make a golden calf, what do? Yeah, so they begin to worship, they begin to party, they begin to dance, they begin to offer sacrifice and homage to this golden calf. And as it is made, I always make a special point to stop right here, because this is the part of the story that no one ever taught me growing up. So maybe they taught you and maybe you've always known this, but somebody read verse 8. Okay, notice that. Notice the connection of the lowercase g gods that they are worshiping is in conjunction with them being brought up out of Egypt. So the worship that they are giving and the worship they're pouring forth is to, even though they had, because of their idolatry, they had a misunderstanding and saw not singular God, but plural gods. Despite that misunderstanding, they are worshiping the one, or in their case, they believe ones, that were the source of the power of the 10 plagues. They're worshiping the ones that they believe parted the Red Sea. They're worshiping the ones that brought down manna and quail from heaven and fed them. They're worshiping the ones that brought out water out of a rock. And so granted, they are there's a misunderstanding of God versus gods. There's a misunderstanding of how they're supposed to worship God. But at the same time, there is a sense of purity in what they're trying to do and what they're trying to connect. The connection they're making is who we are praising, the God that they are praising is the God of the 10 plagues, of parting the Red Sea, of bringing manna and quail from heaven, bringing water from a rock. Like that is who their worship is being poured out to. So it is misdirected. Absolutely. It is not pleasing to God and it's sinful. Absolutely. But let's give them the small token of credit of in a sense, they're giving their worship in the kind of right direction. In that they recognize the power of God through the 10 plagues, through bringing them up out of Egypt, through parting the Red Sea, through, I can continue to list all of them. So as they begin to worship this golden calf, in connection, they are worshiping the source, aka God, of who has done all of these miracles and all of these wonders before them. Obviously, God's wrath is angered because they worshipped Him in the very way that He told them not to just a few chapters prior. That would be chapter 24, when Moses comes down, relays the 10 Commandments to them, and then they begin their covenant with one another. But anyway, so just in a very short amount of time, 8 chapters later, you have them turning from that. Now, what is God's plan? Picking up in chapter 32. What does He tell Moses? Yeah, before we go that, sorry.
They didn't have much. This is probably gold that they plundered from the Egyptians when God told them back in chapter 3. Earrings and this and that and the other.
Yeah.
They plundered the Egyptians. So this is probably Egyptian gold.
Very good point. Very good point. A connection to the fact.
They had a lot on their own.
Right. Yeah, great point and connection made back to this gold maybe being taken from Egypt, given their history and their slavery. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, He wants Moses to step aside. Let me consume them all with fire, with His wrath, and His wrath would be satisfied by doing that. And how does Moses respond? Yeah, right. He honestly is a diplomat. I believe he is a go-between mediator, if you will. He pleads his people's case for them in front of God and before God. Does his best to present a reasonable case, and I guess it's reasonable enough because in verse 14 you have God relenting of that disaster that He had spoken. And so from that point, Moses goes down from the mountain. He is burning angry. He walks up on the camp. In verse 19, he sees the calf. He sees all of the dancing. His anger burns very hotly. He throws the tablets out of his hand on the foot of the mountain. And then he, interestingly enough, in verse 20, what does he do? Yeah? Burns it, powder, and mixes it in water and makes them drink it. Talk about a very firm statement being made by Moses, and probably a very memorable statement, right? I don't know if it is the equivalent of having your mouth washed out by soap. I don't know if you've ever had that happen before, but I can confidently say that Irish Spring doesn't taste good. It's supposed to be memorable, right? It's and disgusting. It's supposed to leave those people with a reminder of the consequence of angering God, disobeying and angering God. So, that's fair. That's a great point. Great point, Miss Melinda. He just gets done making a case to plea before God and calm God's wrath, and then he goes off of the mountain and burns and grinds up a golden calf and makes them drink it.
I think it's all said in one verse here.
Yeah.
But you can imagine the amount of time it took to burn down a golden calf and turn it into powder after grinding metal into powder and then giving it to all of them all together. That anger had to burn him for an extended period of time. It wasn't just a couple of minutes. Very true.
This wasn't a singular moment. This wasn't a flash of anger. I guess it was a slow, steady burn. Okay, we keep moving on through the story, and what do you have? What do you have next? There is we'll move on to chapter 33. There's some more stuff at the end of 32 that I really like, but just for the sake of the major storyline, getting into chapter 23, what's the next decision that is given to Moses from God? Yeah. Leave Sinai and what else? Who are they leaving without? There is somebody's presence that is very, very important to who they are and what they're doing, that God said they are going to go without. Not a trick question. Who's the most important presence in the camp of the Israelites? His. God's. That is the decision, and that's the consequence of their sin. From God's perspective, is you're going to go on, and you're going to go on without me. Okay? He makes a promise in verse 2 that I'm going to send an angel before you to drive out all these bad guys. But look at verse 3. Go into land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you're a stiff-necked people. God said, I can't remember the name. Miss Elizabeth, who wrote Two Roads Diverging in Wood? Robert Frost. So we have our Robert Frost moment, right, where God said, this is it. Like, you're going to go this way. I've made a promise, and I'll let you keep it. I'll even send an angel to ensure my end of the deal. But I ain't doing it. If I hang around with you people much longer, there's not going to be any Israelites left, because I'm going to consume every one of you. And so there is a moment where, again, Moses does what Moses does best, I think. He pleads his case once more. And so there is this pleading at the tent of meeting where Moses and God, they convene, they come together. And as God comes down, verse 10, pillar of cloud at the entrance of the tent, Moses speaks with him and intercedes for his people. And so as he goes before God for them, notice about, if somebody would please read verses 12 through 16 of chapter 33. Exodus 33, 12 through 16. And that's one of my favorite, that end of verse 16 is one of my favorite lines in the whole trifecta, the whole 3 chapters. Is it not you're going with us so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? I believe that it is a blessing for Moses to recognize. He recognizes what makes them different and what makes them important, what makes them set apart. And it's not anything of their own doing. It's not because they're of the lineage of Abraham. And it's not because they've been brought up out of the land of Egypt miraculously. It is God's presence and God's presence alone that is of value. And he said, if you're not going to go with us, then we might as well just stay right here. If you're here, then we're here. And so as Moses makes this plea, it would be interesting. I would love to do a word study. I know that word that Philip read in his translation is grace. This one is read as favor. I don't know if anyone else's reads loving kindness. But if it does, then that's the Greek word for hesed, and that's such a special word when it comes to their view of God, and that word encompasses mercy and grace and favor and devotion. It's such a deep word, but anyway, it might not be. I'd have to do the word study on it. But there is this conversation between Moses and between the Lord. And what do we find at the end of chapter 33? What does the Lord decide? He decides to go with them. Good job. So there is that moment of intercession. God decides that He will continue to travel with them. And then we get into chapter 34 and what happens in response to God saying that He will continue to go with them. New tablets. God's like, well, if we're going to continue on this journey, since you broke the last ones, go get yourself another couple pieces of stone. Got to redo that. Okay, what else do the people do? What does Moses have the people do? Starting in verse 10. Renewed the covenant. And he said, behold, I am making a covenant before all your people. I will do marvels, such as have not been created in the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. And notice, I love the beginning of the next verse. And so God makes that promise of all the great things He's going to do through them and for them and by them. They're going to be awesome. Now, verse 11, observe what I command you this day. And that is the two-part, I think, relationship of their covenant. And it's really interesting because this isn't the first time and it's not the last time that the people of Israel, God's people in the Old Testament, renew their covenant. They really have to do it quite a bit. It's so interesting to see how the covenant had to be renewed in such a short amount of time. And that's why these 3 chapters are so integral to me and the entirety of the Old Testament, is they set the tone for the rest of the Old Testament. God gives them everything they need as explicitly and in black and white as they need to do it. They decide to do what they want. God is angry and wrathful, and they have to deal with the consequences of their actions, and then they repent, renew their covenant, and the whole thing starts over again. So, as we look at this process, as it is here in Exodus 32, 33, and 34, and also as a foreshadow of the rest of the Old Testament, what stands out to you in these chapters as we start to look at acceptance and rejection? How does it all tie in? What applications do you see in these 3 chapters and in this story as a whole?
I see parallels between that, what we were just talking about, in 34, 10, 11, where he's saying, it's like, I'm making a covenant for you all people, I'll do marvels. He's talking about what he's going to do. Observe what I command you this day. He'll do all these things so long as we listen to what he says. And I see a parallel between that and now. It's like it's the same way nowadays. A lot of people think that all we got to do is love Jesus and we're good to go. Mm-hmm. And we have to follow what he told us to do, what he's commanded us to do. It's very similar, I think.
And I think from the beginning of Jesus' ministry, that's something that they understood that we didn't whenever he used the word covenant. Like whenever he came in proclaiming a covenant, we don't use that language. And we do make covenants today. We just don't use that term for it a lot. And so just by sheer definition of the word, you had people in the first century that heard Jesus came proclaiming a new covenant, and they understood that is a two-ended, two-sided agreement or come to terms that they're making with each other. It's not just one-sided on God's end and us simply reaping benefits, but there is something that we're coming to. We're both coming to the table here. Absolutely. What else do we see and notice?
Verse 13:32. It kind of looks like Moses is reminding God of his promises. I know it's not possible,
but Yeah. Verse 13. As Moses is pleading his case, he says, remember Abraham, Isaac, Israel, Jacob, your servants to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I'll multiply your offsprings as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I've promised, I will give you your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. And I love the side note that you made of as far as theology goes, we can't actually remind God of anything. But it also is another great reminder that from the beginning of time, humanity's greatest flaw is we try to make God like us. Like we try to communicate with Him like He's one of us. We try to relate to Him and come to know Him like He's one of us, even though He's so far beyond us. And so I think the word is anthropomorphize, like to make God like one of us. We do that a lot, right? And so Moses did as well. He didn't even catch himself. He's before God saying, well, now remember what you said, as if God didn't know exactly what he had said. He remembers it in real time. That's in the definition of his name. But anyway, yeah, great point. So there is almost a reminder being given as Moses falls back on promises made not even to himself, but falls back on promises made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Okay? Yeah.
Because you go, I mean, we're less than a year from leaving Egypt. And we don't really know how long the plagues took or anything like that for sure.
Yeah.
Timing, but, how far are we from, well, I'm not the guy. Aaron's so much more eloquent as a speaker and all this type of stuff that he said. And now we see why this choice was there, why he chose Moses because of his strength and who he was.
Very good point. Very good point.
Because they were, it says he was delayed, Moses was delayed on the mountain. That's what the people thought. This is God's time. It's not their time.
Yeah.
And so they're, all of this is working up to where God knows exactly what's going to happen and things like that, where they're at. So, the whole time is about trying to get these people where Moses is, I think.
Yeah. So that's a couple great applications in there, one of which being the timing aspect of the whole story, that it was from their perspective that Moses was being delayed. It wasn't like God had said, be back in 3 hours, and at 3 hours and 30 minutes they were like, well, time to make a golden calf. But you have their perception of, man, this is really taking a long time. Man, this is really delayed. And they took matters into their own hands, which is another tendency of humanity. It's another tendency of God's people from beginning to end, is our timing doesn't always align with His, and that frustrates us. And whenever His timing isn't our timing, we try to take matters into our own hands. But then another one that I hadn't thought of that I really like is that this is the guy that back in chapter 3 stood before the Lord and said, I can't go before all those Israelites and tell them that you're going to take us up out of Egypt. Like, I can't go and speak before Pharaoh and tell him to let these slaves go. Like, I'm not eloquent enough of a speaker to be able to do that, God. And then fast forward, and in chapter 32, he's not just speaking to a bunch of Israelites. He's not just speaking to Pharaoh. Like, he's speaking to God Himself. Right? And doing so, and I don't want to say this as a negative or sinful, but doing so very boldly. Very Hebrews 4 boldly. So another great point in Moses' development and his growth. Okay? Any others? Yep.
Aaron just lies, since this calf just came out,
Oh, yeah.
I don't understand how you got away with that.
Yeah.
Not being punished, really punished.
For sure. It's interesting the way that Aaron is making quick excuses for himself, right? It just happened. Which again, we'll talk about it here in a minute. I think a lot of that connects to some of their preconceptions coming from Egypt and coming from a land of idolatry. But we'll come full circle to that here in just a minute. Okay. Any other notes that stand out to y'all?
What you were kind of saying when you started when they made that golden calf, they kind of thought they were doing a good thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's what's just kind of sad.
Mm-hmm.
I think, because I just think to myself, I think I'm doing really good things, and
Yeah.
maybe I'm way off track.
And so, granted, so we're looking at history, and point in time that we have proof of this is not as far back as this event is. But I know we've looked back, and historically there is a connection made in idol worshiping people and believing like that appearances of God and the idols that they make and they worship are connected with each other. And so it could have been kind of cause and effect. It is very possible that they were trying to create a cause and effect. Okay, God is delaying with Moses the way that we're going to contribute, or even the way we're going to help this process or help along the appearing of God and the connection with God and with Moses is by making this golden calf and making this golden image to worship God and stir up the gods. Because keep in mind, which we're about to get to this here in just a minute, they're so rooted in Egyptian idol worship. And so that's where their influences are. And in a lot of ways, they hadn't been taught much any better. And so it's not like you had these Hebrews that were just perfectly devout to the Lord throughout their time in Egypt. They had been enslaved so long that just like in the time of Judges, they were going to cry out to anybody that'd save them at this point. And so they finally remembered the God of their fathers and cried out to Him. But that didn't mean that they hadn't been spiritually polluted by their time in Egypt. So another great point. They thought that they were doing a good thing. They maybe even thought they were helping what was happening on Sinai by building this golden calf and worshiping it. Yeah.
Even though we were slaves, they knew what their life was.
Yeah. Okay.
Here they are out wandering around in the desert. They don't know where, what, anything else. And now their leader's gone.
Yes. Great point.
They're pretty desperate.
I think that there is trials that often come by uncertainty. And I think when things aren't stable is when we're really put to the test. And that connects really well with where we're going. So I'll ask you this question, and this is where I'm led to in our study of acceptance and rejection. Most times, if not every time, the process of acceptance and rejection, whether that be with friends, whether that be with God, whether that be with us accepting or rejecting ourselves, will come down to a choice or a string of choices. And so in this passage, what did Israel choose?
I would say rejection, to a certain extent, because it's, I mean, what have they known for the past couple hundred years is nothing but pain, betrayal, hurt, and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then they finally have this hope. Someone brought them out, and then immediately that hope disappears. There's all those same things that they had felt for years and years and years, suddenly rushing back and like, well, something brought us out, let's go ahead and start worshiping that.
Okay. Any other thoughts? And maybe not particularly choosing acceptance or rejection, but what's the choice that they made in this passage that led to being rejected by God? That's probably a better way to word that. What choice did they make that led to maybe their own joy, their own happiness, their own acceptance, but led to, on the inverse of that, God's rejection? We've talked about it all night. Yeah. They're worshiping something other than the Lord Yahweh Himself. And I'll make the case they chose their old habit over God's acceptance. They chose what was comfortable over what God had commanded just a few chapters before. I need a couple people to read for me really quickly. I need somebody to get Joshua 24:14. Joshua 24:14. And then somebody else grab Ezekiel 26-7. Ezekiel 26-7.
24:14.
Yeah, Joshua 24:14.
Now therefore fear the Lord and serve Him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord.
Ooh. So you have Joshua, Moses' successor, that says, put away the gods of Egypt that your fathers served. Okay, Ezekiel 20, 6 and 7.
For thus says the Lord God, behold, I will bring against her from the north Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings, with horses and chariots, and with horsemen, and an army with many people.
Rats, I gave you the wrong verse. Okay, well, you're like, that doesn't sound right. We're not talking about Egypt at all. We're talking about Tyre. Yeah, so in the book of Ezekiel, if I'm not mistaken, you have the judgment of the nations, which are all really, really short, and then a 3-chapter long judgment of Tyre. So going back to that. Well, if I had more time, we would find it. There's 3 or so chapters that's specifically given to Egypt. Is it? Is it 26? There's Ezekiel. Okay. Well, I know that the lament of Egypt in Ezekiel starts in chapters 29 and 30, but nevertheless, you have a reference back to the idol worship of God's people back when they were in Egypt, just to go to show that this was something that they were very comfortable with. And so idolatry was ingrained in them, and it's what they knew. And when it came out, when they came to a moment of uncertainty, like we were talking about, it's what they fell back on. So humans, I think, were natural negotiators. We see that with Moses. We see that with Moses and the Lord. And we also see it with us. There's a lot of justification, I think, that goes on between Israel and between Aaron as they're working through, okay, what's just happened and what do we do about it and how do we respond to it? And they thought, well, surely, and this is the part where we even are tempted to fall into this today. We believe, if I do this and I'm just 100% genuine, then surely God's going to understand that. And I wish that were what it took. Like, I wish that were the fullness of it. But in all reality, what we see throughout Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament alike, is that while God does desire for us to be genuine, He also desires for us to be genuine enough to consider Him, right? Consider what He's calling us to do. Consider what He's asking of us scripturally. So humans are natural negotiators. I wish we had more time. Okay. We're going to spend 1 minute on each of these. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and go to the very last slide and let you see all of them. So what I pull from this and the conversation of acceptance and rejection, the very first thing is create God-accepted habits so that we have something substantial to fall back on in moments of uncertainty. So realize that they had a habit and a comfort zone of idolatry, right? And that's what they fell back on. But had they created healthy habits that were not full of Egyptian idol worship, then certainly that would have been their comfort zone and what they would have fallen back on in a moment of uncertainty when Moses is gone, when their leader is no longer there, or the moment whenever they feel like God is delaying. And we get in those same spots where we feel like a pivotal person in our lives, maybe they pass away and there's a lot of uncertainty with that. Or maybe we've been praying for something for a really long time and we don't feel like God's answering. There's a lot of uncertainty in that. I believe if we make consistent, God-acceptable habits in moments of certainty, then we'll have something to fall back on in moments of uncertainty. And here's the deal. Let's make sure that we don't just say, oh, the preacher said habits in Bible class, so he means prayer and Bible study. Okay, absolutely. Obviously, those two are the correct answer. But if those are the extent of what we're doing, then our faith is not transcending further than just our Jesus moments, okay? Healthy habits are created whenever we do consciously choose prayer, whenever we do consciously choose Bible study. But healthy habits are also made whenever we consciously choose to reach out to swallow our pride and reach out to somebody that knows more than us about something and seek their wisdom. Like, that is a healthy habit of doing that and consciously doing that instead of just trying to fall back and figure it out based on our own wisdom and based on our own understanding. There are healthy habits that we create whenever we go into routines that put us in a place to maybe meet people where they're at, or put us in a position to help other people. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the habits and the motions of our regular day that we never create opportunities for ourselves. And then we want to be like, well, God, why aren't you giving me any opportunities? And He's coming back at us like, well, you've done the same thing every day for the last 55 years. Like, of course you're not finding new opportunities there. And of course you're not growing there, right? So if we create healthier habits when we are vigilant and it is easier on us, then we'll have those to fall back on in moments of instability. And I do that all the time. I try to create new habits all the time. Reaching out and talking to mentors is something I have done, and it's really hard, actually. People you hadn't talked to in a while, but you know they know a whole lot more than you do about it. Like in the last month, I've probably called 8 different people about drastically different things. Some of it is about money stuff. Some of it is about ministry stuff. Some of it's about family stuff. Some of it's about all different stuff. But it's put me in a position where seeking out other people's wisdom is something that's more comfortable to me than it was. And so that's a super simple habit that I wouldn't do in a really unstable time in my life, but right now it's a good time to be making that into a habit. Okay, the second thing, notice and don't forget, God was very intentional whenever He brought His people out in the wilderness. God didn't make His people in Egypt. God didn't take His people into the land of Canaan and make them there. He didn't take them to a place where they had any other influences but Him and each other. Like, God created His people in a vacuum. That's what the wilderness was. I believe that is the entire purpose of it, is He got His people alone, one-on-one, and taught them how to have a relationship with Him. God teaches us, oftentimes, in solitude and in a vacuum. And what we need to realize is that and humanity recognizes this, okay? Like, you have a school system that promotes some of the most sinful, horrible, awful things and accepts them in the whole wide world. But you know what they still teach your kids? Character is what you do when nobody's watching. Because it's in those moments of isolation, when nobody's watching, that we truly establish a lot of who we are, and what we value, and what we prioritize, and what we care about. So those God-accepted habits, maybe it's best for us to establish them in a vacuum out in the wilderness compared to when we're surrounded by other influences. Imagine how much difficult and how much harder this story would be for Israel to repent if they were surrounded by Egyptians that don't see anything wrong with the golden calf they had. Like, that extra added outside influence is something they didn't need in making that habit and that decision. And so, first thing, create God-accepted habits to fall back on. 2, practice those in a controlled, isolated, vacuum-like setting. Practice those without being surrounded by 100 other people, because that's an influence that we don't need. We need to go ahead and set that practice as a part of who we are. And the very last thing, and I'll pull up this slide just for you. Well, no, that's it. Have Moseses in your life that want you to be accepted by God more than you want to be accepted by God. And I know that sounds crazy. I know you're like, well, I want to be accepted by God a whole lot. Exactly. Find somebody that loves you enough that they want that for you more than you want that for yourself. Because ultimately, like, there comes a point where I believe God and Moses up on Mount Sinai, Moses would be like, hey, you see all them fools down there making a golden calf? How about you and me make our way into the land of Canaan and let's handle this thing? But that's not what he does. Moses makes a case for those sinful people because he wants them to be accepted by God more than they want to be accepted by God themselves. Find Moseses and cherish them. Once you find them, get people in our lives in our corner that want us to be accepted by God more than even we want to. So anyway, it's been a good class. I wish we could have gone through that last half more quickly, but we have more things to get to if we're going to make it through the whole Bible by the end of the year. So thank you. People in the back, you can come in now. I'll quit talking. How about now? How about now? How about now? Ooh, I think it's on now. If you want to, go ahead and mark number 200 in your songbooks. Number 200 will be the song of invitation. Number 200. A few quick announcements for you. We want to pray for Melissa Comer, that is a friend of Roxy Sutton, with breast cancer. Also, Johnny Combs with his surgery in Louisville. Shane Patterson, that's a friend of Joe Eden's, has cancer behind his eye. Kelly Smith has had some respiratory issues, some breathing issues, and she's seeing a specialist for that. Willie's son-in-law has had some surgery complications, and is he still in surgery now? Like, was that? Okay, he just got out as y'all got to church tonight. Okay, hopefully we'll be home Friday. Prayers for them and his recovery. Then Robbie Jones used to worship here. She is in the nursing home in Gainesboro. Then Al Licht, a friend of Steve Frazier's, is having heart surgery coming up soon and in need of our prayers. And then we also want to continue to pray for Miss Elizabeth Hoffman as she came forward this Sunday in need of prayers. If you didn't get a chance to love on her Sunday, then feel free to do that this evening. Up and coming events and things, okay? We have this Friday and next Tuesday, men's and ladies' Bible studies. If you have any questions on that location, time, then see Steve Frazier or Miss Debbie, respectively, for each one of those. Then October 22nd, that is this upcoming Sunday. We will have our small group meetings on Sunday evening for the PM service. If you have any questions, get with your leader about that, and your leader should be getting with you as well with all of the details on those. The bulletin should have locations, and leaders should have more information outside of just a location. Then the following Saturday, so the 28th, not this Saturday, but next Saturday, we will be having our trunk or treat in the back parking lot. So be getting your trunks and things ready. There will be a slight change. There won't be any chili and hot dogs to go along with that. There have been some complications in past years. So we won't be serving any meal to the community or to us, but if you want to stay after and order some pizzas and hang out, then feel free to do that. The church doors will be open. Okay, then the following Sunday, October 29th, it is a fifth Sunday, but we will have worship scheduled just as normal with trunk or treat and Halloween and having a meal the Sunday before with small groups. There won't be a fellowship meal, won't be a 1 o'clock service, so that will be a 6 p.m. Worship service on that fifth Sunday. And then the last couple of things I have for you as far as the adults go. November 1st, we'll start back the Wednesday night men's class. So all of you guys that are normally in this class, feel free to go to that and partake in that study. That'll be wonderful. And last but not least, the sign-up sheet for couples retreat has gone out, and looking at a deadline at the beginning of December. So please see Matt and sign up ASAP for that. That'll be the last weekend in January of this next year. So sign up and get paid for that. Okay. Youth news. There will be a Jaywalkers organizational meeting on October 22nd. That's this Sunday after morning services. Pew Packers is Sunday nights at 5:45. Wash is Wednesday nights at 5:30. Oh, and also if you are one of the youths, junior high and high school, and wanting to go to the haunted house thing, see Matt about that. That's this Saturday. Get information from him. Okay, I think that's everything. No Pew Packers. No Pew Packers with small groups. Great note. Thank you, Randy. All right, number 200 will be the song of invitation. Yes? Philip wants me to announce we have more bread. If you want bread, it's in the back. It is leavened, so I'm not sure if it's communion ready. If it was, then we just keep it and use it. But there's bread in the back, and it's in loaves. So if you'd like to get some, that'd be wonderful. So yeah, the invitation for this evening, the I am the bread of life. No, I'm just kidding. I thought of this verse today as I was getting out and enjoying what was left of our small semblance of fall as it was 70 degrees. Because as you know, the beginning of this week was really, really cold and nasty, and it made everybody really, really sad. At least it made me really, really sad. But then I saw that today it was going to be sunny and it was going to get up to 70 again. And so it's interesting to see how many people were doing like their one last push of nice weather, right? So you had people like me that were up on a ladder power washing the side of his house because I didn't want to do that in the freezing cold, and it's the last warm day I'm going to get. You had people out that were taking their motorcycle out one last time to try and run all the gas out of it for the season and get one good last ride in before it's freezing cold. You had people that were getting out and going to the park because they want to do that in 70-degree weather, not 50-degree weather. You had people that had realized what was coming in winter and realized how special maybe this one last moment, one last push was to enjoy nice weather again. Like I said a few Sundays ago, we had a specific study of heaven and hell, and I made it very, very clear that I don't find it biblically fair or healthy to pull out this conversation of heaven and hell and eternity and maybe fearmonger people into a very important decision that Jesus says in Luke 14 should be calculated and weighed, not emotionally dove into. But that being said, I also think it is very fair biblically to ask the very question that is asked in Acts chapter 22, verse 16. And why now do you wait? And why now do you wait? I think it's very fair to ask, what if the opportunity that has been presented us is a really special one? What if the opportunity to respond and put on Jesus is similar to that very last 70-degree day where I've got to get out and I've got to take advantage and I've got to take a hold of what God has put in front of me and make the most of it? Because what if an opportunity like this doesn't come along again for a really long time? What if it doesn't ever come along again ever? I wonder, all those people rushing out to take advantage of that 70-degree day, how many of us this evening are truly in need of rushing out and taking advantage of what our God has to offer in salvation, of what He has to offer in coming to know Him, meet Him, and connect with Him in the waters of baptism. So, if you're in that spot, I'll ask you the exact same question that Paul asked. And why now do you wait? Is there anything that has been holding you back that shouldn't be holding you back? Is there anything that you haven't seen before that you see now that you realize, I don't need to leave here without doing something? That's great. I'm glad that you're on the right track and making the right thought process. But the right thought process will only get us so far. Will you be willing to take that first step? And will you be willing to no longer be a waiter, but a doer, and begin your new life with Jesus? I hope you will. I hope it's now. If it needs to be now, come talk to me as we stand and as we sing.